Hi, I'm Conrad Marshall, and from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, welcome to Good Weekend Talks, a magazine for your ears featuring in-depth conversations with fascinating people from sport and politics, science and culture, business and beyond. Every week you can download new episodes in which top journalists from across our newsrooms talk to compelling people about the definitive stories of the day. In this episode, we speak with Missy Higgins. The Australian singer-songwriter has just produced a new album, Second Act, which is as raw as her breakthrough from 20 years ago. It's an emotional work, charting her life after a marriage breakdown. She talks about the travails of being a single mum, along with the shows she's playing around the country right now. Higgins is the subject of our cover story this week, and hosting this conversation about the generation of women touched by the artist who've come out to support her now is the writer behind that profile, Good Weekend senior writer, Melissa Fyfe.
Thanks, Conrad. And welcome, Missy. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to start at a place where you spoke about in the third interview I think that we had. We do 2 interviews for Good Weekend profiles and then a fact-checking interview. And in the last interview that we had together, you spoke about this new album that's coming out next week, The Second Act, and you talked about making it in a dark house at night, quiet house after the kids had gone to bed. Mm-hmm. And you said that it was an image that stayed with me, like you had a whiskey on the piano and you said that this house, this dark, quiet house, held the weight of the songs that you were trying to convey. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I guess when I set out to record the album, I wanted it to be, I wanted it to reflect the mood and the place, the feeling of place of where I wrote the song. So I wrote the song, just in a little room at the back of my house, and it was always very quiet because it was always late at night. And when I was recording the demos, I just record demos into my phone. I had to sing the songs in a kind of a whisper because I didn't want to wake the kids up. And yes, I often had a glass of whiskey on top of the piano because it helped me get into the mood. And that was the same as when I was writing the songs, like I think I was going through such a tough time that those few hours at the end of the night once the kids had gone to sleep, that was my time to be by myself and reflect and just kind of let go a little bit. So, when it came time to recording it, I just wanted to do the same thing because there was something really so intimate about the demos and the way that they ended up sounding. And the songs are so there's such a vulnerable quality to them, I guess. I didn't want to lose that by kind of schmicking up the production too much.
Yeah. This is a Missy that's kind of a Missy Higgins that's going almost harking back to the Missy Higgins that did The Sound of White, like a very different person in a very different time of your life. But there's this emotional kind of, the album is so raw. Do you feel that? Is that what you sort of felt like? Yeah,
there's when I finished recording this album, I realised that there was a real parallel between my first album and this one, in that I don't think any of my albums in between have been as raw and as honest and vulnerable and kind of unself-conscious too. I think when I was writing for The Sound of White, most of them were written as a teenager in my bedroom, not ever imagining that someone would ever hear them. So I never had that in the back of my head. And with these songs, I didn't either because they all came from such a place of just like desperation to figure out what these kind of hard emotions were that were all coming up in me, like trying to move on from heartbreak and trying to figure out what the rest of my life was going to look like as a single mum and trying to rewrite the story for myself that had been, my old one had been burnt to the ground. So I needed to, figure out what came next. And I wasn't thinking about an audience. I wasn't thinking about anyone listening to these songs or judging them or if they'd make it on the radio. I just needed to untangle everything that was inside me.
Yeah. I mean, the album is not, I think your manager, when I interviewed him, he said this is not an album of like revenge songs or like it's not, Alanis Morissette, Jagged Little Pill or Olivia Rodrigo's, what's her, I can't remember the name of Sour. Sour is the name of her album.
Yeah. It's not
like
at all.
No.
It's actually not about my marriage at all or that relationship or my ex-husband. Like it's very much about me moving on and trying to figure out, what my new identity is going to be and finding myself in a place that I had never planned for, which, I guess no one really ever plans to get divorced and be a single mum. And I just found myself really, really lost. So this album was a way of trying to kind of dig myself out of that place bit by bit, song by song.
Yeah. I mean, we talked a lot about this in the interviews, but your songs, The Story for the Ages, is really about like what we think about taking on marriage as this story that we're part of and it's going to be forever. And then what happens when it falls apart and trying to grapple with that. And I think we talked a lot about how you particularly looked at your parents for an example of a marriage that was very strong and stable that provided you with that stability, and then how you feel now and grappling with that as well.
Yeah, I think growing up in a family that was very strong and together, and I don't know, we always kind of prided ourselves on being a really close family.
Yeah.
Having these family dinners, and I don't know, I guess I just always held my mum and dad's marriage in really high regard, as life goals. And I wanted that for my kids as well. I wanted a really together family, that lasted the test of time. And I was just so disappointed in myself for somehow not making that happen and not making it work. And so I guess there was a lot of shame that I was grappling with, and when I was writing these songs, I was just trying to confront that head on and go, where's this shame coming from? Where's this guilt coming from? And is it justified, or should I give myself a bit of a break? There's a song called The Second Act, which is the title track of the album, where I'm trying to tell myself to go easy on myself, that we're all humans, we're all kind of fumbling our way through and nobody knows what they're doing. Everyone's just acting well.
I think I'm ready for the turning of the wheel. Find fresh waters for these old wounds to heal. All that it took to try to succeed.
I loved your reflection about we put this value on forever, but it's a big thing to carry on your shoulders.
It is.
And then also I loved your reflection, I think it was again in probably the last interview we had, where you talked about maybe it's better to have a couple of, soul nourishing relationships rather than one long mediocre one.
Yeah, I think a lot of people settle for a long mediocre one, to be honest. Yeah, I think it's funny coming out the other side of it. You start noticing these kind of very strong kind of cultural obsessions that we have, and one of them is longevity at all costs. I think, like staying in a marriage at all costs, or staying with the one job. Everyone applauds that. These old people who've been doing the same thing for 50 years or 60 years, but no one seems to prioritise whether that person was actually happy doing that or feeling fulfilled. It's all about, did you stick it out? It's this kind of hard work ethic that we've got. So I just wish there'd been a bit more, focus on a really good quality relationship, regardless of how long that lasts. And I like the idea of looking at my marriage as this beautiful thing that lasted 9 years, not this failure that only lasted 9 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
9 years is a long time.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And we did it really well, I think. Like we had a great friendship and a lot of love for each other, and we've managed to navigate the end of it really well too. So I'm quite proud of us in that respect.
Yeah, I think that's lovely that the co-parenting relationship has morphed into a loving relationship as well. That's important.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that I can be proud of myself for that because, that takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of kind of compassion when you don't necessarily want to feel compassion. Like there can be resentment or anger bubbling up, and you're like, no, we've got to stay civil. We've got to remain friends. We've got to do this together, even if it's tricky. And so, yeah, we've maintained a really good kind of level of respect for each other, I think, throughout it all. And I think both of us know that it's important that we remain as close as possible for the kids' sake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As part of the piece, I went to see your show at the Palais. Now, so this is such a special show because you're doing your new stuff in the beginning, and then the entire Sound of White, your breakthrough album, which was an absolute mega selling album. So you do, in the second act of the show, you do the whole thing, not in order of the songs, is it? It's sort of a bit jumbled up.
It's not quite in order of the album. It didn't really work for
a live show
because, Scar's right up the front of the album. So I didn't want to play that first.
Yeah. And so what I loved, and as part of the article, I spoke to Rachel Perkins, your friend and filmmaker, and she had the same thing that I had, which was this just loving watching people around us as they cried and laughed, and I cried and laughed. I was so shocked at times at how kind of raw and revealing you were on stage. What has it been like on this tour? You've done 40 shows to about 80,000 people now. Like what's it been like?
Yeah, it's been like one massive therapy session, to be honest, like 5 months of therapy. If therapy was, standing in front of a few thousand people and being applauded for expressing your emotions. Yeah, it's been so amazing. I think it's been the most incredible tour I've ever done because it's not only playing my new music and telling these stories and anecdotes that are so raw and honest and kind of unflattering. Like I'm just talking about being a mess the whole time, really, in the first act. And then singing songs about hating myself and things like that, like it's not very, I said to someone else, like, it's not very sexy, this new album. Like, it's not like anyone's going to want to date me after this. And then there's an interval, and then the second half is me playing The Sound of White.
And we will only need each other, we'll bleed together. Our hands will not be taught to hold another's, 'cause we're the special two. And we can only see each other, we'll breathe together. These arms will not be taught to need another's, 'cause we're the special two.
And I've just been so blown away by the reaction to this anniversary tour. Like, so many people have kind of come out of the woodwork and told me how important my first album was to them, and even young singer-songwriters kind of coming up now are telling me that I was an influence, or that my first album was an influence on them, and I really had no idea. I mean, I knew it was popular back in the day, but I didn't realise that people still listened to that album, or they still thought it was, an important piece of work. And yeah, it's changed my whole perspective on that album.
In what way? Like you appreciate it more? Or?
Yeah, I think I appreciate it more. I mean, I always appreciated it for kicking off my career and being the reason why, I was able to tour so much and keep on touring because of the success of that album and build upon that. But I appreciate it even more now because I realise that it's stood the test of time for a lot of people. And I don't know why that album in particular, but it has. So it must have some sort of special quality to it. And, I almost don't feel responsible for it because I feel like a completely different person to who I was 20 years ago. But I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because I had no idea that there was this group of totally rusted on Missy Higgins fans that really follow you around, and they've really sustained your career, I think, because that you don't get played a lot on commercial radio. But these, I think it's something to do perhaps with the honesty and vulnerability of the songs, but also that these, and they mostly are women, but they're men too, who have had it kind of, like I say in the story, like kind of, you know, it's part of their neurowiring of because they're in adolescence, and it's or around there anyway. And it's that, you know, those albums when you are they're just really important to you when you're a teenager or a late teenager. And it becomes part of, you know, your brain almost. I think maybe it's about that, but it was definitely, it was very emotional. Like I felt the shows were emotional, partly because of the old stuff, but also your new stuff, like that song about, you know, a complicated truth about having to tell your daughter about why you can't live with daddy anymore is just, people cry in the audience, and I think they're crying for all sorts of different reasons. What's your take on that?
Yeah, there's audible sobbing in the audience when I play that song. It's quite intense.
Can you paint the picture of how you wrote that song and
yeah, I wrote that song after my daughter had obviously she'd had some sort of realization, whether it was after reading her, you know, her fairy tales or her storybooks, or maybe noticing the TV shows or the families at school not looking like ours. And she started asking why Daddy couldn't live in the same house with us. And she started asking about marriage, and, you know, I explained to her what marriage was and what it meant, and then she was like, well, if you gave each other rings and made promises, then how can you just decide to not be married and break that promise? And I was, you know, we were driving along in the car while she was asking me these questions from the back seat, and my heart was just breaking, and I didn't know really how to answer her in a way that a 5-year-old might understand. And it happened a few times in a row. So yeah, one of those days when the kids were at their dad's house, I had the house to myself, and it was feeling particularly empty, and it was a cold, windy day outside, and I just sat down at my piano and I thought, I'm going to try and put into words what I couldn't say to her in the car.
The trees are swaying out the window, and you're not with me today. You're with him, and that's okay, that's okay. I hope you're running round in circles, hope you're laughing till you drop, hope you're feeling safe, I hope you're feeling loved. The days are longer when you're not here. I've been staring at the sky, wondering what I used to do with all my time. You're a universe of starlight bursting.
And it took a long time to write that song because I really wanted to say it the right way, and I knew that it would be a special thing for her to listen back to one day, you know, when she was old enough to understand. But I was hoping that it might, well, for both my kids really, I was hoping that it might allow them to understand things from our perspective a little bit better.
But it's also works both ways. I think it's like it sort of hits for parents who are struggling to tell their kids a similar thing at the moment, but also for those adults who were those children in the back seat, do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot of adults that come up to me or message me about that song and say, you know, I was sitting with my mum during that song and we were both holding each other and crying, and my mum was saying, this is exactly what I felt, you know, when me and your father split up. Or there's a lot of kind of parent-child relationships but coming to my shows and then kind of sitting in the audience and seeing themselves in that song. So, yeah, whether it's the child or the parent or, you know, someone who went through that a long time ago when they were young, I find that a lot of people can relate to it.
How do you feel being so vulnerable on stage? How does that feel for you?
I think I've had a lot of practice over the years. I think my songs have always been pretty vulnerable, pretty, you know, straight from the heart. But I think over the last 20 years, I've started giving myself more and more on stage. And I think as I've gotten older, I've become more comfortable to really be myself completely up there. And little by little, I've found that the more real I can be, the more it's appreciated. You know, I've never been a kind of a character performer. I've never been somebody who has a stage persona. It's always been just me. You know, like my friends come to the shows and they're like, yeah, you're just yourself up there.
Yeah.
And I feel like with this album in particular, it's so full on and honest. I kind of have to preface it with a bit of a, you know.
A content warning or no?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I feel like it's almost weird if I was to be really kind of demure and quiet in between the songs and then just come out with this full on, like bearing my absolute guts to the audience.
Yeah.
If I don't kind of chat to them like human beings or friends as well.
Yeah.
Like it's got to be all part of the same show, I think. So it feels like we're just, otherwise it might feel a little bit uncomfortable, like, wow, she just revealed so much and then she's really quiet and reserved in between songs. Like what's going on? Does she regret writing such an honest song? Is she shy about it? So I need to let them know that it's okay. I'm fine with the fact that I've admitted all this stuff in my songs because I'll chat to you about it. Like it's all part of the same thing. It's all me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other song that I really love is You Should Run, which is about dating as a single mother, really, and like and also this time of life, you know, like it's just not the same as it was.
Yeah.
And that you come, as you say in the song, like it's a package. There's like two little humans and the house is messy and, you know, and also you can't make him or her whatever number one. It's really tricky.
Yeah, there's maybe 4 or 5 songs on the album about trying to date again after this big breakup and being a single mum. Because, it is so complicated and it's so messy and you feel like you're just bringing so much into the like so much baggage and they're never going to be your priority. And I think that's really hard for some people, especially if they don't have kids. It's really hard for them to accept that you're really not going to have that much time to see them, especially during the week, and it's all going to depend on, you know, whether you've got the kids or not and what your schedule's like. And it's just your capacity for giving yourself to somebody else isn't like it was in your 20s when you were single.
You can't give 100%.
No. And it's a shame because, you know, I remember that being such a beautiful feeling. Like you just fall completely into something, you know, before kids. You could just, you know, immerse yourself in each other and just lie around in bed all day and just like stare into each other's eyes and get lost. But that's just not life anymore. So, it takes a bit of adjusting.
Yeah. I wanted to talk briefly with you about the way that you manage your tour and your band, because that sort of came up when I was talking to people about how you do that. You make a real effort to include women who have young kids. It's almost like you had a band full of pregnant people for a while.
Yeah. And now we've got a creche backstage, basically.
So how does that work? What do you do to make that work?
Yeah, I just I know that a lot of women, when they get pregnant in my industry, people stop calling and they stop hiring them for tours. They stop even asking if they want to do it. But I made a concerted effort to not only like ask if they wanted to do it when they were pregnant, also when they had newborns, but encourage them and say, you know, I'll pay for a nanny, you know, we'll get you a separate car with a car seat, and just kind of make it as doable for them as possible, because I know that it can get really, really hard and you can feel a bit invisible once you're pregnant and then you have a kid, because people think you're just not able to do the things that you did before. And yeah, it can be harder. I mean, you've got a baby in tow and that's not always easy, but it can be a beautiful experience taking your kid on the road and having them with you. And, you know, when they're really young, you can do that because they don't have to go to school. So it can be a special time. And because there's so many women in my band, we all just love it, and we all love having kids backstage. And, you know, sometimes everybody has their kid at a show. So sound check is literally like there's more kids on stage than there is grown-ups. But yeah, it's really sweet. I love it. It brings a really good vibe to backstage.
And also probably does extend the careers of some of your band members. Were saying, well, one of them was saying that she didn't even know whether, as a touring session musician, that she would have a career after kids. Yeah,
because historically it's been, you know, a time when women do disappear and people stop calling, and once that happens for a few years, you just get out of the loop, and so people just don't think you're available anymore. And it's one of those things where you kind of have to stay in it in order to have that longevity. So women don't, a lot of the time they don't want to take that time off because they want to still be able to do it in 10 years' time or 15 years' time. But in order to do that, they've got to make sure that people know that they're still a touring musician.
So, Missy, you've now finished these 40 shows. What's next for you?
What's next is, well, because all the shows sold out, which is kind of mind-blowing in itself, we have decided to put on a bunch of big shows at the end of the year, so like half a dozen encore shows, so that anyone that missed out on tickets could hopefully come to one of those. And we're playing at the Sydney Myer Music Bowl and the Sydney Opera House forecourt, so some really beautiful venues. So hopefully anyone that didn't manage to get to one of these 40 shows can come to one of those at the end of the year.
And the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was you were talking about your reflections. You know, you turned 40 last year, that you've started to sort of think a bit about women ageing and how that affects women who are middle-aged.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it happens to everyone once they turn 40, but you start kind of reflecting on the fact that you're starting to not look like you did, and you're starting to not look like all the other the younger generation of female singers doing what you are doing. And yeah, I'm grappling with it a little bit because there is this kind of cultural obsession with women staying the same age and not being desirable anymore once they start to get wrinkles and they start to sag a bit, whereas men seem to stay desirable once they get wrinkles and start to sag. It doesn't seem to matter in society's eyes that men age. They still remain kind of sexy and it's quite confronting as a woman to be like, okay, I'm moving into that age where people start treating you differently, and it's not so much you're moving into a kind of a different category. I mean, I've never used I feel lucky that I've never used my body or sex appeal, I don't think, to sell music, which I'm glad about because there's a time limit on that, whereas there's not a time limit on your brain.
Yeah, exactly.
or your capacity to like make good music. So I'm glad that I didn't do that because now I don't have to worry so much about like maintaining my sexiness or my like bikini body in my video shoots.
Yeah.
But I think any woman moving into their 40s is confronted with that, and it's a conscious decision to go, I'm gonna talk to myself with compassion. I'm gonna talk to myself to my reflection in the mirror in a way that I would want my child to talk to themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, especially when you have a daughter, like I'm looking at my daughter and going, I've really got to learn to love myself no matter what I look like, so that I'm modelling that for her. Because if I'm always kind of criticising myself, or I'm moaning about getting older, then she's going to be terrified about getting older as well. So she's going to, she's going to adapt, or she's going to adopt those kind of negative feelings towards herself. So, yeah, I think having a daughter and also just moving into this stage of my life is kind of, there's a lot of conscious, kind talking that I have to do to myself.
Yes, I
which
get
which
that.
isn't always easy, but like every day I'm trying to remind myself that it's important.
Yeah. And lastly, Missy, I was wondering where you are at now. Like you said, this has been like a 5-month therapy session, and you've sort of come out the other side. You've had all these people come to your shows. It must be so bizarre doing that kind of teenage Missy Higgins and the sort of 41-year-old Missy Higgins material. But where are you at now? Do you feel like you have any answers to the questions that you're posing around midlife and these sorts of crises that we face often in this weird, as you say, the weird middle act? I think you said was one of your quotes.
Yeah, the in-between.
The in-between.
No, I don't have any answers. I guess the only thing I've figured out is that there isn't really any answers. I think there's kind of a wisdom to, coming to that realisation that it's all just, everyone's just fumbling their way through. And I've learnt, I think, over the course of the last 5 months that time will just do whatever it wants to do with you, and there's no forcing yourself to be at a stage you're not, and there's no forcing yourself to be ready for something if you're not. Like I can't force myself to be completely over the heartbreak and really confident and empowered for the next stage if I'm not feeling that yet. But it'll probably come.
Yeah.
And I'm getting closer to that. And the last 5 months has definitely helped get me closer to that. I don't think I'm grieving anymore. I actually feel like I'm in a really good place right now, because I'm really enjoying just being by myself. I don't feel like I need a relationship at all. In fact, I think it's probably much better to not, because I don't have any time or space, and that's kind of stressful, the thought of trying to make time for someone else. And I'm putting any extra energy I have into just trying to be the best mum that I can. Especially after 5 months of touring and not being there as much as I would have liked. But yeah, I think that the last 5 months has helped me move through the difficult grieving stage and be more prepared for, I guess, the unknown future, and accepting that I'm never going to know what's going to happen tomorrow, but kind of being okay with that. I don't have to write a story for myself, because if I did, I'd just be disappointed that it didn't come true. So just take whatever happens and always be open to new experiences. That's my current motto.
Thanks, Missy, for coming in.
No worries.
It's been lovely talking to you over various times now. So thanks
we've had quite a lot of big chats now. We've gone deep.
We have. So thanks for coming in, Missy.
No worries. Thank you.
Good Weekend Talks is brought to you by the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Subscriptions power our newsrooms. To support independent journalism, search Subscribe Sydney Morning Herald or The Age. And if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate and comment wherever you get your podcasts. This episode of Good Weekend Talks is produced by Chi Wong. Editing from Conrad Marshall. Tom McKendrick is head of audio. And Katrina Strickland is the editor of Good Weekend.